starting right on time. This is very, very unusual normally. So it's 5:30. So without being delayed, this is a very exceptional event actually. It's not the standard kind of conference that you would attend and expect a diversity of attendees, but this is quite specific, quite more of a professional workshop dedicated to the topic of the archaeology of death, if I may say. And death has been handled in very different ways in different civilizations. The concept of death, which is a very constant concept, if I may say. People live in different ways, but they all die the same way. And how the civilizations perceived how people should be handled when they die and what's going to happen after that, it's amazing, actually. I mean, looking at this from different perspectives, not just from the perspective of architecture and archaeology, but again from the social and anthropological perspective. How did people deal with death? Was it, I mean, either it was death due to war or a battle or disease or just old age or whatever, but the concept of death and dealing with it is very interesting. Even in my field, in my discipline, in the field of maritime archaeology, the link between death and boats have always been very interesting, and it always raised questions. Why many civilizations conceived boats as the means of going to the afterworld? Why boats? Why not chariots, for example? Why not horses? Why not anything else? Why boats? The Egyptians thought the same way. The Greeks thought the same way. Either boats crossing the Nile or crossing a river. The Vikings even thought the same way, boats crossing the oceans. So why was it just boats? Again, a lot of questions that comes out of this. I don't want to talk a lot about this, but actually the privilege of having this event is not mine at all. I'm not in charge of this, but actually the people who initiated this idea were Kyriakos, Nicholas, and Professor Mona Haggag. It's their idea, it's their effort, and it's their suggestions of the topics and of the subjects, and to them I am very grateful for doing this. The Hellenistic Center, as you all know, we are interested in different aspects of the Hellenistic civilization, including archaeology, architecture, and even philosophy and other aspects. So this actually falls directly within our domain, if I may say. The coming 4 days, I mean today and 3 days more, will include a number of speaks, presentations, field visits, science visits with professors, with professionals, and this is very different than just going on your own to see a site, and application actually to what we're going to hear on the actual sites. Again, this is linked to one of the most important excavations and conservation projects that's taking place in Alexandria now, is the conservation of the Shadbi tombs, led by Professor Mona Haggag. And again, this is something that worth highlighting and worth knowing of. Probably most of you know about this, but the outside world, I mean outside this hall, very few people know about it. So we should highlight this project, this important project, and the role it's playing for preserving one of the oldest necropolis in Alexandria. Without taking more time, I'll just give the word to Professor Mona Haggag, Professor of Classical Archaeology, the Department of Archaeology and Greco-Roman Studies, Alexandria University. She's my professor. She's my mentor, basically. And she will be, again, talking about the conference. And over and above, she's the director or the president of the Archaeological Society of Alexandria, which actually is playing a role now more than ever the society has played before. I'm being very honest and very frank about this, but the actual role that the Society of Alexandria is playing now is unparalleled. It's open to the outside community, it's hosting events, it's contributing to actual physical work. I think the Society's project in the Shadbi, the one that's going on now, the project before that was the Society's project in Tabziris Magna, which was
in the 30s.
1930s. So since the 1930s until 2021, no actual work has been done by the Archaeological Society. So this is again a great achievement of the society and falls directly within the scope of this conference. Welcome you all to the event, to the Biblioteca Alexandrina, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it a lot the coming 3 days. Please, if you have any concerns, any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me, my colleague Mark, or any of the Hellenistic Center team, and to Professor Mona Hakkari. تفضل يا فندم.
Thank you, Professor Ahmed Khalil. You give me more than what I deserve, actually, but it's you, actually, is the person whom we have to thank, because it was very simply that we, Kyriakos, Nicholas Dimakis, my colleagues and friends, sincere friends actually, were sitting and thinking of making such a workshop, and we called Ahmed, and after half an hour Ahmed was with us in Shadbi site, and we decided upon everything. And then Mark George, actually, where is he? Mark is the hero behind everything that we have organized, actually, and I would like to thank him very much. This event actually comes out of a memorandum of understanding that has been signed between the National and Capodistrian University at Athens and the Archaeological Society of Alexandria, and this is the first event to be organized according to such a memorandum, and this makes me very happy that we are now coming to the ground and achieving something that hopefully will be useful to both the Greek side and the Egyptian side. This is one thing which is important because it represents two cities, Athens and Alexandria, who once upon a time caused the world a lot of illumination. They conveyed science, they conveyed art, they conveyed philosophy and ways of thinking and attitudes of life. Each in its turn had added to humanity something that is still resisting and still useful to people up till today. So it's something normal that Athens and Alexandria come to be unified in a new and modern 21st century message to the world that we are still trying, at least, to do something for humanity. So this is one thing which is actually worthy of paying efforts, paying time, and studying and achieving at the same time. I am privileged today again that I meet Professor Plantsos, who is a very renowned scholar worldwide, for the first time, and to welcome him in Alexandria again after a long time. So it is really an honor for myself, and I think for everybody in this room and in Alexandria as a whole. The Library of Alexandria actually is the very suitable place to inaugurate such an event. The Library of Alexandria, nobody denies its role in humanity, so it's now continuing, and we are part of this illumination. We are part of this enlightenment. This is also something to make us happy and, let's say, proud. I'm not going to speak about Shadbi. Actually, thank you for the nice words, Dr. Ahmed. And you will see tomorrow something that is that you may consider an addition to the archaeology of Alexandria. I'm not directing this project alone, but I have a very good partners, Hossein Abdelaziz and Kyriakos Savlopoulos, who are supporting from all sides and in all details for this project. I'm happy that members of the project, Basma, Minna, Ibrahim El-Khouli, and others in our team who are the corners of the project, and they are carrying out on daily basis every and all activities in the site. I do thank them very, very much, and I'm happy also that they find in this workshop something that can be some kind of the fruits of what you are doing in the sand and in the water and in everything there, so you have something that is fruitful for people. Thanks to Dr. Marwa Al-Wakil, who is the decision maker behind such events, actually, and without her, she is a very open-minded person, and without her, we could not step any further steps, actually, in this respect. Thank you all, and thanks to my friends who always encourage me and give me the push, although I am old enough to rest at home, but you keep pushing me, and I do thank you for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mona. And now, Nicholas, you are one of the dynamic, creator of this event. Actually, you initiated the idea, so please.
Thank you. Thank you for the very kind words. So, though you've managed to leave me out of words with all this kindness and hospitality and your very warm welcome. It's always a pleasure to be here. It's always a pleasure to be in Alexandria. This time, pleasure comes with honor, and I thank you both personally and institutionally for the great cooperation we've had so far, and fingers crossed it's going to continue.
Sure.
It's up to us in the end. The University of Athens, the National Kapodistrian University of Athens, is very honored to be here, not individually, but with a team of people this time. My dearest colleague and friend, Professor Plazos, and of course our postgraduate students interested in Hellenistic archaeology and funerary archaeology in particular. We all, in a way, became rather enthusiastic by the time this workshop was coming to reality. And we were very keen and very eager to be here and do our best in order to contribute for a very fruitful meeting, a meeting that everyone can get food for thought when leaving the room, and of course opening up minds and constructing new ideas about future research and future collaborations. Of course, I cannot leave out of my thanks my dearest friend Kyriakos Savlopoulos, which was the main reason I first came to Alexandria professionally this time, a couple of years ago. It was his personal, above all, kind invitation to my professional, let's say, ability as a funerary archaeologist to come and join my best to the project. Thank you so much, Kyriakos. So, apart from all these thanks and greetings amongst each other, the bottom line is that we're all here, and we're all looking forward to a very interesting meeting in a very fascinating topic in varying respects. We're going to hear scholars talking about funerary art. We're going to hear scholars talking about pottery coming out of burials and graves. And of course, we're going to hear scholars talking about proper funerary archaeology. Although most of these topics have been rather systematically addressed in other varying contexts, they've rarely been brought together within a Hellenistic or Roman context. So, apart from exchanging ideas, it is also a challenge for us to succeed. It is also a challenge for us to achieve what has been described in the abstract you all, I think, have in your hands and the description of this meeting. But above all, it is a meeting addressed to postgraduate students. And so please, whenever you feel like it, just fire away your questions and we'll be very kind to answer at any possible way. With all this, I leave it to Kyriakos and his final words before we begin. So, thank you.
So I would like to welcome you also from my side. And I don't know from where to start to say what I have to say. So let's do history. So all this to me is a little déjà vu. I have seen this scene before. That was like 15 years ago when we did another workshop. And more or less we had the same kind of preparations and the same kind of discussion. So at that time was the beginning of the Hellenistic Center. So we wanted a summer event to begin. So I had to turn to my good friends and ask their support immediately. So Professor Hagag said immediately yes. Professor Khalil said immediately yes. Professor Abdulghani was there, said immediately yes. And not only, and many people that are not here today with us. But this is how I met Professor Dimakis. He came as a PhD student, as he did the next year in the second Hellenistic workshop. Unfortunately, there was no third, because we were obliged to live historical moments at that time in our lives. That was also fascinating in a way. But I was always having in my mind that there should be a return to these nice sort of events, not because they were great events in terms of production of knowledge, let me say, but the interaction between the people that were coming in these workshops from different places of the world, and all with the same idea that we come to know and to learn as much as possible. So that took, let's say, left the workshop only as an axis upon which we walk, and then we took our ways through the discussions and through this cross-cultural, it was cross-cultural actually, contact and dialogue. So I'm so happy to see this to happen again, and so happy to see that now the Hellenistic Center is at the hands of Professor Khalil. I feel blessed about that, and we had a lot at that time. So the Hellenistic Center is still here, and I can tell you, you won't find a better home for those who would like to introduce themselves in Alexandria. There is no other, let's say, such a great gate pass other than the library. As for the Archaeological Society, I don't think we need much to say. We still read the books of the Archaeological Society. We always return to that, and at least from my side, as a member of the society, I would say that the return to field work is just the beginning of a new era for the society. We won't stop at this, for sure. This changed our lives. This is what we said, that our lives have changed after the beginning of this project. And just follow what we do, and I think you will all be happy. So coming back to Professor Dimakis, I think the first one you came as a PhD candidate, and the second came as a PhD holder, and now you come as professor. So it brings good luck to people, just to know, at least to him. So enjoy the workshop, and feel free to ask anything who can help, and see you tomorrow in Sadbi, inshallah. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, okay, so we are on time, a bit early, which is great. Thank you all for your kind words, and Kyriakos and I, we go back many, many, many years of friendship. We have known each other for the past 20 years, probably, or something. We have met in Egypt, in England, and in Greece, and everywhere. So next would be our main lecture for today. Our keynote lecture for today by Professor Dimitris Plantos, and it will be about styling social identity in Alexandrian free paintings. And Professor Plantos is a professor of classical archaeology at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, and he studied history and archaeology at Athens and holds MPhil and PhD in classical archaeology from Oxford University, where he also spent 3 years at the British Academy, postdoctoral fellow. He is the author of various papers and books on Greek art and archaeology, archaeological theory, and classical receptions. His Greek language textbook on Greek art and archaeology, first published in 2011 by Capon Editions, was published in 2016 in English and is now available by American publishers Lockwood Press in Atlanta, Georgia. His most recent books in the art of painting in Greece, in ancient Greece, published by Capon Editions and Lockwood Press in 2018, is also available internationally. So with me, let's greet and thank Professor Dimitris Plantos for his presence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Khalil. It's a great pleasure to be here today to address this audience, to inaugurate this very exciting workshop. So I would like to begin with thanks. I would like to thank the Hellenistic Center for organizing this, and Professor Khalil for chairing this event today. I would like to thank the Archaeological Society and its president, Professor Hagag, for the initiative, for the welcoming, for all those great words Professor Hagag said about me just now. And of course, I would like to thank you all for being here. I'm very happy that my two dear friends and colleagues, Kyriakos Savopoulos and Nicholas Dimakis, had the idea to organize this workshop, and I'm very happy to be here with some of our students. We live in a world shaped by social identities. We frame ourselves according to ethnicity or nationality, our gender and our sexual orientation, our religious beliefs or dietary habits. We're either Egyptians or Greeks, Christians, Muslims or agnostics, men, women, or one of the 50 shades of gray that come between them. We can be pacifist vegetarians or militant vegans. You name it, and you can be sure you can find some fraction of any population to identify with it. We fashion our singular, exclusionary selves based on a ready-made cluster of physical or cultural habits we like to think of as social and cultural identities. And we do this in order to face the challenges of our times, or indeed the challenges posed to us by our own pasts. For in the words of British sociologist and cultural theorist Stuart Hall, identities are the names we give to the different ways we're positioned by and position ourselves within the narratives of the past. Thank you. And positioning ourselves is what we have learned to do best in late modernity, assisted by information technology and its breathtaking advances in the last 30 years or so. We have learned to digitally manipulate our images, crafting ourselves via the art of self-portraiture, both pictorial and literal. Our images describe us culturally constructed subjects, national, gendered, embodied. We offer ourselves to ourselves and others as well-framed subjects, both identified and identifiable, as a way of explaining ourselves, or indeed as a way to tell or even paint our own stories with our own words. as put by Italian-born cultural theorist Teresa de Lauretis, identity is the narrative that gives meaning to experience. How possible is it to trace such cultural politics in pre-modernity? Alexandria, as also Rome, was one of the most modern cities of the classical world. It seems to have defined cosmopolitanism in an era some millennia before cosmopolitanism even existed as a concept. Now that I think about it, Alexandria is perhaps the youngest metropolis of the classical world. Be that as it may, we're not likely to find too many traces of a latent modern sensibility regarding social identities in a place such as Hellenistic Alexandria. For us, in the late 20th and the early 21st century, national identity, for one, more often than not coupled by the religious denomination assigned to us by birth, remains a crucial identity factor. We're either Greek or Egyptian, either Christian or Muslim, and these assignations seem to be providing meaning to our day-to-day experiences or even helping us make sense of them. Take the present speaker, for example. Born in this very city, a few hundred meters from this very spot by Greek parents, I was raised and schooled as an Egyptian Greek, whatever that might have meant in those days. This was an identity assigned to me by birth, programmed to define me both a singularity and a privilege. In our world, retaining those originary features, factual or imagined, is meant to suggest who we are, what we have always been, once and for all. Not so much in those days. Greeks and Macedonians seemed more ready to go native as soon as they emigrated to Egypt, or Syria, Persia, and Babylonia, for that matter. And what we understand today as predetermined and unchangeable cultural traits were in fact back then perceived as anything but. My favorite example of such fluidity comes from an early Hellenistic text, Mime 1 by Herodotus, composed sometime in or about 270 BCE. In it, we find a young woman sitting in misery in some unnamed Greek town, waiting in vain for her fiancé's return. An elderly matchmaker visits her in order to suggest an alternative proposition, another man, more readily available. To make her case, she explains how the elusive boyfriend is not likely to return anytime soon. For it has been 10 months, as she says, since Mandris, the boy's name, departed for Egypt, and he has not sent his intended a single line. The house of the goddess Aphrodite is there, meaning in Alexandria. Everything there is and which can be is in Egypt. Riches, palaestri, power, happiness, glory, spectacles, philosophers, young boys, temples of the brother-loving gods, an excellent king, a museum, wine, all the good things one could desire, women without number, by Persephone, mistress of Hades, the sky is not so glorified by bearing so many stars. How must you feel as you sit warming your chair? Admittedly, what Herodotus' matchmaker is describing is a newly found, a modern, if you will, desire for sights, wonders, and earthly delights unbecoming of traditional Greek values, an overpowering need to taste all the new land had to offer. The city American papyrologist Naphtali Lewis once called El Dorado of the Nile. The luring destination for every Hellenistic vagabond, Greek or otherwise, who wished to chase his fortune away from home. One is reminded of Idyll 14, penned by Theocritus at about the same time as the mime by Herodotus I just mentioned. A young man called Aeschines is in distress in the aftermath of his bitter betrayal by his mistress, who has gone off with another man. Aeschines contemplates leaving his native land, and his friend Theonicus concurs. If so be thy mind is made up to go thy ways abroad, I'll tell thee the best paymaster a free man can have, King Ptolemy. Thinking of Ptolemy II. A kind heart, man of parts, a true gallant, and the top of good fellowship, knows well the color of a friend, and still better the lock of a foe. Like a true king, gives far and wide, and says no man may, albeit one should not be forever asking, Aeschines. So if you're happy to clasp the warrior's cloak over your right shoulder, and dare to stride on both legs as a hardy foeman brandishing his shield, run off to Egypt tomorrow. I often think of those young men portrayed by Herodotus and Theocritus, the faithless, absent drifter of the former and the cocky, heartbroken wanderer of the latter, of the lives they may have lived in their newly found home and the deaths they may have died. And, as luck and archaeology would have it, it is about the latter we get to hear or indeed see more than about the former. Take, for example, this painted limestone stele from Alexandria, today kept at the Greco-Roman Museum here. It belongs to a type readily recognizable as Greek, with simplified Naiskos typology and the characteristic pediment crowning it. It shows a cavalryman, no doubt the deceased, galloping to the left, chased by his footman. The horseman is suited in Greco-Macedonian military gear, with a corselet over his tunic, a chlamys flying behind him, and high boots. The whole composition, paralleled by similar ones from Greece and the rest of the Hellenistic world, be they painted or sculpted, identifies the man as one of the original settlers, or perhaps one of the first wave of emigrants, the likes of Mandris and Aeschines we were just talking about. The stele seems too early to be of a much later cavalry officer named Dryton, a Cretan whom we have come to know pretty well from surviving papyri archives. Dryton lived and served during the 2nd century BCE, first in the Greek-speaking town of Ptolemais, and then in the native populated town of Pathyris, where he was posted for the rest of his career. Indeed, he remarried there a young wife from Cyrene, her name does not survive in the text available to us, whose father was doubly named Ptolemy and Pamenos, and was, like his own father and his father's brother before him, a foot soldier serving in the Ptolemaic army at Pathyris. Still, they all identify as something else than what they are, Cretans and Cyrenians, 2 or 3 generations on. Carrying both a native Egyptian and a Greek Macedonian name is not uncommon in Ptolemaic Egypt, as it was not uncommon in Seleucid Babylonia. In papyri documents surviving from the 3rd and the 2nd centuries BCE, we find that settlers continue to identify as Greek or Macedonian until late, even though they tend to be bilingual more often than not and carry mixed cultural backgrounds if often enough. Thus, in the year 158 BCE, a man called Ptolemy, son of Glaucias the Macedonian, as he says, identifies himself as a Greek to claim his privileges against the natives. On the other hand, as time progresses, it is common to come across Ptolemaic subjects carrying 2 names, one Egyptian and one Greek, thus not always being able to tell which came first. This way, an Asclepiades, we know from some papyri, is also identified as Menkes in some documents, and sometimes with both names. Epolemon is also named Petasuchus. In other situations, we come across civilians with Greek names identified as siblings with civilians carrying native Egyptian names, and so on. Does this mean the newcomers got along with those they perceived as the natives? Certainly not. Remember, identities are narratives active in the present, that is, processes that help us overcome present experiences. Where these experiences may have been, we can often tell from the way these men and women are portrayed on their funerary monuments. Young Aeschines, as described by Theocritus, would have experienced life in the barracks before dying a more or less honorable death surrounded by his comrades and perhaps family. The Ptolemies employed a large number of soldiers and officials and allotted land to certain groups of soldiers to secure their loyalty and increase the revenue on the land. Immigrants represented about 5% of the population and came from Cyrenaica, Greece, the Aegean, Macedonia, the Balkans, Asia Minor, and Judea, with a few others from the Levant and the Western Mediterranean. Ethnic denominations are often recorded on legal and fiscal documents as well as funerary stelae. A soldier in a blue cloak is shown bidding farewell to two young girls, presumably his daughters, on his own funerary slab from the second half of the 3rd century. He is identified as Galatian in Greek letters. The slab comes from a large hypogeum tomb in the Ibrahimia necropolis of Alexandria, discovered in 1884. Another slab depicting a Galatian soldier comes apparently from the same underground tomb. Here we can also see the oval-shaped shield typically associated with Galatian mercenaries in that period, or perhaps the particular military unit as part of the Ptolemaic army. Based on our modern notions of nation and ethnicity, we tend to identify these ethnic denominations as standardized state labels like our own, yet there seem to be some crucial differences. The greatest variety of ethnic labeling from Ptolemaic Egypt may be found in legal contracts and petitions, but also in tax lists. To a lesser extent, official correspondence concerning land allotments to individual soldiers identified each man with his individual legal ethnic label. The early Ptolemaic identification system was specified in an ordinance, a royal prostagma, dated to around 275, stating how people were required to specify their official identity for each type of contract and in complaints to engage in litigation. The ordinance is lost, but its content is partly preserved in two documents used by officials or notaries, which spell out how three legal categories of persons must indicate their legal identity. The information that each individual needed to provide according to his or her category, namely the soldiers, the citizens, and the others, differ significantly. Soldiers, in particular, were required to provide their ethnic origin, their patris, as it is called in Greek, as a way of clarifying their legal or fiscal status, which in Ptolemaic Egypt is not always the same thing. Ethnic denominations are sometimes, especially in the Middle and Late Ptolemaic periods, conventional rather than factual, serving rather as legal ethnic labels marking occupation and or social status, but not necessarily related to ethnicity. This means that this Galatian soldier may not really be Galatian after all. Social status is understood here as founded mainly on lifestyle, education, and hereditary or occupational prestige. I'm drawing here mostly from the work by Christelle Fisher-Bovet on official identity and ethnicity in Ptolemaic and early Roman Egypt. Administrative reasons may also lie behind the tendency to identify with ethnic designations the deceased on funerary stelae from other parts of the Hellenistic world, such as the important harbor city of Demetrius in Thessaly, as the effective capital of the Macedonian kingdom for a long stretch in Hellenistic history, and as an important port of trade. Demetrius attracted, like Alexandria, a diverse crowd of businessmen, entrepreneurs, and traders, as well as mercenaries and other military personnel. Their funerary slabs, like those of Alexandria, identify them as men and women of their class and social importance, advertising their wealth and social acceptance by their peers. The evocation of their ethnics on their funerary monuments, we hear of people from Amphipolis, like on this slab, from Thebes, the other one from Crete, or from as far as Sicily and beyond, makes us wonder, based on the example of Alexandria, whether it might also serve as administrative or even bureaucratic purposes. In Ptolemaic Alexandria, at least, legal and fiscal status came with privileges or lack thereof, and the meticulous classifications we find in our records seem to support that. The Ptolemies distinguished between Egypt's native population and their fellow Greek and other newcomers, on whom they relied for military service, among other things. This distinction was racial rather than ethnic. As has been well argued in the last 30 years or so, race is a social construction involving a series of social decisions and not only privilege, a rhetoric of biological essentialism in accounting for race, but also determine which biological features to privilege in assigning racial categories, such as skin color, the meanings that such features are presumed to signify, for example, serving as signs of supposed social or intellectual inferiority, and the subsequent uses to which they are put, for example, rationalizing forms of discrimination. Rather than considering race as a static concept, one that holds the same connotations and consequences regardless of context, we may treat race as a dynamic formation, that is, as a socio-historical process by which racial categories are created, inhabited, transformed, and destroyed. This is a concept I'm borrowing from Michael Omi and Howard Winant. According to this view, we may use the concept of race and racial distinction to denote the shifting organizational principles that establish identity and structure its meanings and representations. Here, I draw largely from the earlier work of Denise Eileen McCoskey, herself relying on the fundamental research by Dorothy Thompson and Willie Clarice. Going back to the funerary stelae, like the ones we see here, they seem to pay meticulous attention to representing their owners as persons framed by social and cultural processes, items of dress, household and symbolic paraphernalia, posturing and gesturing. Ptolemaic stelae proceed to portray their sitters through a sophisticated repertoire of strong cultural references. In this, they are fundamentally Greek, drawing from Greek art's ability to convey cultural context through subtle narrative allusions. The stelae create a pictorial world in which to place the recently deceased owners. If the stele with the soldier bidding farewell to his two daughters suggests a newly found home away from home, the privileged life of an emigrant and the family he built in for the land of the opportunity, the repeated appearances of cavalrymen on these stelae might suggest a systematic attempt to portray cultural as well as ethnic distinction, which in the Ptolemaic regime largely also meant privilege. Style, therefore, besides the overbearing presence of Greek lettering, may have been used to suggest race. Facial features and skin color were also demonstrably employed, as for example in this funerary slab showing yet another soldier in blue cloak receiving a large metallic-looking kantharos from a boy who is also shown clasping his master's shield and spear, emphatically dark-skinned and crooked-nosed. The boy is racially defined as a native next to his fair-skinned master, whose skin tones are carefully painted so that they suggest his prolonged manly exposure to the sun rather than his racial make. The slabs in question constitute worthwhile attempts at Hellenistic skiagraphia, as the Greeks called the painting through chromatic tones rather than lines. The figural paintings on these stelae display numerous repetitively superimposed brushstrokes with nuanced combinations of pigments to gradually build up and define color values, thus creating an illusionistic sense of depth and contour, the artifice of the third dimension on a decidedly flat surface. Sciagraphia was an elaborate painting technique based on tonal shading and color contouring, aiming at recreating the sense of volume and plasticity in skin, fabric, or metal and wooden surfaces. Rather than wishing to portray things and figures as they were, sciagraphia succeeded in showing things as they appeared to our eyes, a proposition any idealist would find appalling, yet one any art enthusiast would applaud. Hence, sciagraphia and visual trickery in Greek painting soon became ends in themselves. In the meantime, however, painterly styles were used to denote semblance and indeed physiognomy. Notary documents from Egypt betray a certain bureaucratic anxiety to identify a contract's co-signatories or even witnesses. Individuals are often identified by means of the scars they may carry or the tone of their skin. Thus, Drayton, whom we met earlier, identifies himself in his will as of medium height, dark-skinned, with a scar on his right eyebrow and bald, which is rather odd if you think about it, considering that when his will would finally be read, he would not be there to witness the proceedings or be identified by any of the parties concerned. Elsewhere, on a papyrus from 174, a man is described as light-skinned, with long hair, worn brushed up, long-faced, and hooked-nosed. Post-Aristotelian peripatetics deployed physiognomics as an apparatus by means of which to classify human characters. Soul and body react on each other, we read in Physiognomonics, a text in antiquity believed to have been penned by Aristotle himself, or at any rate, springing from a long theoretical tradition going back to the Babylonians. Skin complexion and eye color, as well as shape, were primarily thought to convey a person's abilities and weaknesses. A pale complexion and bright eyes were the sign of a charitable man. Pale and dull eyes were thought to betray a man's lack of sensitivity. A brave man, in comparison, was thought to have been endowed with a bright eye, neither too wide open nor half closed, and rather dry, not too moist skin, whereas a pale or pinkish complexion were thought to be telltale signs of intelligence. Regarding the depiction of the eyes in particular, we are well aware of the attention paid by both painters and sculptors, notably Apelles and Lysippus, to representing Alexander's forceful character and lion-like qualities, an effort also evidenced in Hellenistic coinage and seal cutting. Recent studies, most notably by Heraclea Brekoulaki, whom we're lucky to have with us today and for the rest of the week, have shown that although great care seems to have been taken in late classical and Hellenistic painting to produce believable images of the human body, especially in contexts such as the royal burials in ancient Macedonia, it is not always possible to chart a clear, a one-to-one relation, as it were, of the images to the philosophical doctrines that they may have inspired them. This is more prominent in the frieze of the Hunt from the so-called Philip's tomb at present-day Vergina, where the pinkish complexion of the man portrayed seems, according to a brilliant reading by Brekoulaki, to advertise those men's truffe, life in luxury, rather than masculine bravery. Be that as it may, and although what we do know from Alexandria so far pales in comparison with the far better examples from late classical Macedon, it is clear that great systematic care is being taken, even by the less accomplished artisans, to convey a believable image for the men and women they portray. We do not know how much of this effort is due to Greek painting's late classical obsession with verisimilitude and lifelikeness, or goes deeper into the realm of physiognomonics, and the meticulously theorized notion that bodily dispositions betray personality, traits, and qualities, or, in fact, to what extent the former is not prompted by the latter. That is, to what extent the desire to produce faces that appear lifelike and true to nature does not reflect a deeper belief that nature reveals the truth it encompasses. If nothing else, and even by unassuming means, Alexandrian funerary paintings make a visible effort to denote the skin complexion through the sophisticated layering of pigments and the tonal variation of colors and hues. Shading is applied by way of course in order to suggest volumes and contours, the intricacy of garment foldings, and the plasticity of the naked flesh. When depicting soldiers, perhaps the most visible effort is to suggest the tanned complexion of masculine bodies, spending too much time exercising or fighting in the sun, away from the comforts of their home, in addition going back to archaic and classical painting. In paintings like these, as also with the partially surviving gigantic funerary stele from Demetrius showing two soldiers side by side, tonal shading also becomes a way to denote the figure's character, thus a clearly visible identity trait marking the way they lived as well as the way they died. The contrast between a paler skin complexion reserved for females and a darker one featured by males is well illustrated by yet another funerary painted stele from Alexandria, depicting a darker-looking seated man bidding farewell to a standing woman. Another dark-skinned man wearing a dark violet himation stands behind the seated man in the center. The pale yellow and violet tones of the garments, rendered quite diaphanous in some areas, especially on the standing female, betray expert command of sciographia, and so does the delicate rendering of the facial features, paler for the woman and decidedly darker for the men. Another intriguing feature of the stele in question is the mise en scène. The background of the scene is divided vertically into two areas, gray on the left and violet on the right. The painter has thus managed to convey the quiet, somber tone of the scene, as well as suggest to the viewer the sense of a closed space, alluding to the oikos, now mourning one of its prominent members. Once again, the point of the scene is not only to elaborate on the way these people lived their lives within their communities, but also the respect they receive from the social milieu now that their lives reach their biological completion. This way of doing things, or reacting to things done to you, comes pretty close to what the Greeks, philosophers and laymen alike, understood as ethos, a fluid trope rather than a fixed trait. Painting, as any Greek philosopher would have it, from Plato and Aristotle to their followers down to the imperial period, was all about depicting a soul's ethos, what most thinkers described as ethographia. Pigment layering and tonal shading is evident in most painted faces from Alexandria, even if the state of preservation is not quite complete. We may be certain, however, that the best among the Alexandrian funerary stelae would depict the subjects with the delicacy we find elsewhere in the Greek world, or the Ptolemaic realm itself, for that matter. A good example is the limestone pedimental stele from Amathus in Cyprus, dating from the 3rd or 2nd century BCE, showing a young man in a sleeved red chiton, enveloped in a long white himation, and holding a bird, presumably a dove, in his left hand. The style is linear rather than painterly, with strong outlines, though in the face the artist seems to have tried to denote the boy by distinguishing his facial features, the shape of the eyes and mouth especially, as well as in the shape of the head, the short-cropped hair, and so on. A much more accomplished example comes from Thebes in central Greece. The bust of a young man is portrayed in a slight three-quarters turn to his right, wearing an orange-red chiton and a creamy white himation hanging over his red shoulder. He is named Theodoros and is greeted as an esteemed member of his community. Dating from the later second or the early first centuries BCE, this example betrays expert use of skiagraphia and tonal gradation. A significantly earlier example from Vergina, painted on the tombstone of a woman from the second half of the 4th century BCE, also displays high quality texturing based on sensitive shadow play and expert use of color. Did the painters of those funerary stelae, as those of the ones from Alexandria, try to represent not just their models' likenesses, but their souls as well? Social identities, to be sure, were not limited to the person's role in society, his or her age, profession, family ties, and community interactions. They also conveyed their religious beliefs and social values, as it were, in a way, portraiture in Hellenistic Alexandria, and one could argue in the Hellenistic world at large, was a gateway to the sitter's soul. Nowhere is this more evident than in the so-called Fayum portraits from late Hellenistic and Imperial Egypt. As a special lecture in this workshop will be devoted to this amazing class of material, I will not have too much to say about them this evening. The style, for one, is tellingly illusionistic, taking advantage of the centuries-long tradition of skiagraphia. Color tones are expertly mixed and shaded in the finest examples, with highlights and shadows added to suggest contours and depth of field. Egyptian mummy portraits of the early imperial period offer good examples through which to study ways in which Greco-Roman painting went about depicting a man's or a woman's or a boy's, as in this example, ethos, as an overall outlook towards humanity and the human condition, society, and communal living, to life itself and to death that constituted life's inevitable termination. If stelae such as this may stand as a brilliant example of that attitude, we may also turn to an earlier stele depicting the actual moment of death, a practice all but avoided in Greek art. Portraying the final moments of the occupant of the tomb was not part of the classical tradition and never became the norm. Tombstones depict the deceased as if still alive, enjoying the company of his or her family, or departing allegorically, bidding farewell to his or her beloved. Even soldiers who fell in battle are shown in their moments of triumph prior to their demise. These are all heavily idealized portrayals of life as it ought to be. A realistic depiction would have carried a frankness that would be unbearable and unpalatable prior to the tectonic shifts in religious and social mentalities that took place in the Hellenistic period. One of the painted limestone funerary stelae from Ibrahimia shows a woman in childbirth falling back on a chair covered in white bed linen, her lower body draped in a red mantle hemmed in pink, and a white himation, her upper body exposed. She is supported by two female attendants, one on either side. The woman at the left holds her right arm, while another woman standing behind her supports her under the left arm. Both attendants wear white chitons covered with brown hematia. The sentiments of grief and desolation permeating the scene are in sharp contrast with the subtle melancholy displayed by the earlier types, where women are shown quietly departing for their last voyage. Owing to its directness, this new iconographical topos seized the viewer's attention and was practiced until as late as the 2nd century AD, when Pausanias spotted one such stele, the painted tombstone of a woman named Zenodike, who died in childbirth and was buried in her native Sicyon. Apelles was known to have included dying men in his repertoire, though we may not be certain whether these were murals or tableaux depicting battles or actual tombstones. An epigram from the Greek anthology describes a painted tombstone like the ones discussed here, showing Neotima, who died in childbirth, attended by her parents. The new mentalities regarding death and the vicissitudes of fate, as well as an emerging new take on religion, seem to have enabled such strikingly unceremonious depictions in art during the Hellenistic period. The most prominent example is the Stelio Fedesti from Demetrius in Thessaly, dating from around 200. Fedesti is shown lying half naked on the bed at the exact moment she breathed her last. At the foot of the bed stands her grief-stricken husband, looking towards his departed wife in disbelief. Two female figures, possibly the midwife and relatives of the victim or slaves, are shown half hidden behind an open doorway, which, in combination with the high walls framing the scene, create a dark, claustrophobic interior space. It is one of the earliest surviving depictions of a built environment, and particularly of an indoor space, which is rendered with such completeness in Greek art. A long epigram beneath the scene identifies the deceased and mourns her fate, not allowing her to cradle the infant in her arms or moisten the lips of her newborn child at her breast. The stele from Alexandria also seems to place its scene inside a home interior, as would be natural, comparable perhaps to its counterpart we discussed earlier. The overtone of such scenes is overtly private, in many ways anticipating bourgeois mentalities of high modernity, seen as the unfortunate, tragic even, though expected culmination of life. Death is always portrayed as a social event, as an integral part of social life, in many respects affecting the community as much as, if not more, than its actual member reaching his or her biological end. And the style of these paintings becomes a representation of how communities remember, or indeed how they try to combat their own mortality. Funerary art from Alexandria, therefore, in many ways the Hellenistic city par excellence, affords us a generous glimpse into the ways we, ourselves, wish to represent the pasts we populate and the bodies we inhabit. As such, it is trying iconographically as much as stylistically to make sense of present experience. Thank you. Thank you very much.
This is just incredible, actually. I know very little about these things, so it's fascinating for me. We have time for discussion. If anyone is interested of asking any questions, comments to Professor Plansas, I have some of my own, but I'd rather start with the audience. So please, if anyone has any comments for on the presentation. Well, I have to start then. You can have a seat here. دكتور محمد تفضل. لا please تفضل.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks very much indeed for this exciting journey between life and death. I mean, in ancient Egypt and Ptolemaic and Roman Egypt. But I have some few comments on some topics. First of all, you said that Alexandria and Rome were modern cities in antiquity. What do you mean by modern cities? I mean, do you mean that they comprised a lot of ethnics at that time, a melting pot of ethnics and so on? This is the first question. Second one, Droyton and his family in the Pathirite, he almost Egyptianized because of the environment in the Pathirite and Upper Egypt was almost Egyptian. But he gained the privileges of being both Egyptian and Greek at the same time, because he lent money to a lot of the, indigenous people and so on, and with a big rate of interest and so on. So he enjoyed a luxurious life at that time. You said that 5% of the population were foreigners. I think the ratio is more than this. I mean, the politiometer all over the Egyptian countryside and so on, I think they comprise a lot of, more than this ratio, 10% or something like that. This is my, my proposal. The prostagma of defining the legal identity of 275 BC, was it mentioned in papyri, or I didn't hear about it?
Yes, we have reflections of it on in the literature.
Yes, in the literature, but in papyri or in
papyri?
In papyri, documentary papyri. But the prostagma itself does not exist.
No, does not exist. No.
Yes.
It hasn't survived. It existed, but it has not survived.
It has not survived.
Yes.
This is what I mean. Yes. You also said that racial distinction. It was a racial distinction rather than ethnic distinction. I think that they are both racial and ethnic. They were integrated. We can't separate one from the other. With a specific.
But sometimes the title refers to what we understand as a national, as an ethnic, an ethnic distinction, like Cretan or Galatian.
Mm-hmm.
The person referred to as a Cretan could be racially not a Cretan or a Greek.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the idea, that the Galatian is a title rather than...
This is ethnic, yes.
An ethnic
yes.
denomination. Yeah. So that's the...
the ethnicity, also represented some racial features in some way or another. So they are integrated.
Yes. But the idea is that sometimes it could be possible to be identified as ethnically with an ethnic epithet like Galatian, but not being a Galatian or a Gaul or a Cretan or a Greek. You identified with the privileges this title bore, but not the racial content.
Yes. These are my very...
It is exciting. This is a really exciting idea, but I don't know. So.
Yes, thanks very much. These are just a few comments for this exciting lecture. Thank you very much.
About the first question, which is really interesting, there is this sense that both Rome and Alexandria appear modern to the people of their time.
Yes.
They are the now places to be. It's like New York suddenly.
Yes,
or
a cosmopolitan cities, yes.
So now everything, so this is modern. This is why I call them modern.
Yes.
They are modern in that sense.
Yes, thanks a lot.
And I think there was a second question, I can't remember.
Just comments about Droyton and his
family. Oh, Droyton,
About the 5% of population
this
were foreigners.
This is
it a statistic
I found, but
yes.
I'm happy to discuss different positions.
Yes. I suppose they are.
It sounded low to me even, but it's a recent paper on that.
Yes, thanks very much indeed.
شكرا دكتور محمد سيفا. تفضلي دكتور مان.
I think other ethnic groups, it depends upon where and when.
Yes.
Because not all the cities were like the others, and also through lapse of time, the composition of the inhabitants of Greek cities and of other cities in the valley differed according to the economic situation and other things. So one cannot specify a certain ratio that has been continued throughout Ptolemaic period or everywhere in Egypt. I think.
I'm talking about the total ratio of the foreign population. So I suppose they were more than this small ratio.
Yes, in Greek cities it should be more actually. Well, thank you, Professor Plantsas. We enjoyed really a new look and a new approach to the tomb stele, to the idea behind the scenes. But actually my comment is very simple, probably because I'm not so going deep to coloring and on the stones. But what I know is that the Dixiosis scenes are coming directly from Attic grave stele. The theme and even the postures of the people, the seated deceased, and the people who are bidding farewell to him, and also cavalrymen, military persons. It's the same theme that is inherited in Alexandria from the Attic grave stele. Do you see, from your very close interpretation of the personalities and the missions they wanted to convey to the people who look at their tombstones, do you see big difference between the Attic examples and the Alexandrian ones? This is my question.
Thank you very much. I think the types are a bit wider than just Attic, because we have similar tombstones in Macedonia itself, painted actually. I think it's called Kleonymos, the deceased, in one very, very well-known example, which is family. There's a Dexiosis, and his family are all around him. And we do have similar scenes on Delos or on Demetrius. So it's not reserved to Athens and Attica, but there's a very strong influence in the first generation of the first couple of generations of tomb painting, funerary stelae painting in Alexandria, and I think the coming of all those people in Alexandria helped for this style to become standardized and become Hellenistic. So it progresses into becoming a style of an iconographical type of its era.
Any more questions? Yes, please.
I think exactly as you said, Professor Plantsas, it is this Hellenistic koine which is formed. And all these iconographies and styles also have maybe some local trait, but they are integrated in this Hellenistic koine, and we have also, technically speaking, certain specificities, but globally there is this, let's say, trend of color, of very bright color, and of course the iconography that is adapted, but as you said, there's a mainstream and then local specificities. But I think it is this koine which somehow gives the trend. Thank you.
And of course, Alexandria helps this koine to be formed.
It's quite interesting that you referred to the goals, and this is something that has been occupying me all the time, the relationship between Massalia and Alexandria as parts of the Hellenistic world. Did you come across, like, in your funerary, like, findings or something, did you come across any relations? I'm trying to trace these relations between the two cities, and I'm unable to find anything.
Between which cities?
Massalia, yes.
Well, no, I haven't come across something like this. There's a notable presence of people identified as Galate,
yes,
in these stelae, but they also appear in documents, and yes, it means that after some time there was just a platoon in the Ptolemaic army, and they were not necessarily manned with people from Gaul, but they were called Galate.
Okay.
So at least this is when people are trying to associate ethnic denominations with fiscal and legal privileges. Mm-hmm. So they were paid more. They were yes, doing different things. And this is why they're called. This is why Dryden insists of calling himself a Greek and a Cretan so many generations later, because it comes with privileges.
Okay. Another question, do you mind repeating, like, the name of the text and the writer who wrote about this fiancée languishing for her...
The what, sorry?
The text that you referred to about this person, this fiancée languishing for this soldier. Could you repeat it, please?
It's Herodas. The first one was Herodas.
Thank you.
One, I think. And Theocritus was the second, yeah.
Thank you.
With the guy wanting to come to Egypt.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any more?
Yes. Professor Plangers, I'm very proud to follow your presentation about Hellenistic Alexandria as an Alexandrian, being the student of your father. He was my teacher here in the school, Mr. Plangers. Now, I'm sorry about the question of the lady about Galatia. It's the region in Asia Minor, in Anatolia. It's near Cappadocia, namely Galatia. It's not the France.
I'm not talking about Galatia, I'm talking about
Massalia, Marseille, it's in France, yes.
Yes, exactly.
But
the thing is, I'm finding it very difficult to trace any relations.
It was a very old harbor. There was a colony of the Greeks before Alexandria, Marseille.
I know.
Yeah, but what link you are looking for?
You're saying?
What link you?
What link? I'm trying to find a link between, were there links between Massalia and Alexandria? And I've been trying to trace this, and I can't find any links.
Harbors, links. The comptoir Méditerranéen. The comptoir.
Professor DeMarcus, Dr. DeMarcus, you have a question? Hassan, Mike, as well.
Thank you, Dimitri, for yet another inspiring lecture, as always. I have just one question, and only one question. How frequently are children being depicted on Hellenistic stele? And if we can answer that, then how easily can we discern things like social identity or cultural traits, even ethnic identity, from grave stele of children in Hellenistic times? Based, of course, on this.
You mean depicted as being the deceased?
Yeah.
Not very often. The ones that come to mind from Alexandria right now depict some children, but as accessories. The deceased is their father, and I think the same goes for the stelae from Delos, from Rhenia. But perhaps there were other ways to mark a child's tomb.
Yeah, I think there's quite oftenly depicted on the Fayum portraits. Quite a lot of children depicted there. I think so. Whether this means
of course they were mummies. So
yes, of course.
Obviously, you had children that died, but the child was there.
but it's broken and we don't have an inscription, but the figure is of a child, surely. The other one is a girl who is described as Cyrenaican. I think from Cyrenaica, yes, but her name is Postas or something like that, and it is a girl. It is.
And is she the deceased? She's the dead.
Yes, she is the deceased because she is the only figure depicted on the stele. This is what I can remember, but I think there are others. Yes, complete Kyriakos.
So in Sadbi we have 4, actually. We have Mistas, who is portrayed with his little duck dressed. We have Meneas, who has also the single epigram ever found in the Eastern Necropolis, who is portrayed naked. The heads are identical. You cannot distinguish. I mean, the portraiture is totally idealistic, and I think the difference between dressing and non-dressing is the sense of innocence, and it's about the age. So being naked in a generic, I would say, image would be a sense of age. So Mistas might have been older, or might have been from another area of the Greek word. Mistas, by the way, could have been from Asia Minor.
Yes, but can you talk about their ethnic identities in these cases? Because my question
This is my question as well. So identities. It's a labyrinth, a discussion of labyrinth. Just to comment that we talk about population, and we know that in the Ptolemaic period, an ethnic term like Hellene or Egyptian could apply to a whole family, regardless of the origin of the members. If the father is Greek, all the rest could be Greeks, also in the census. So it's difficult to understand identity in the way that we understand identity, plus that in Alexandria, after a point, identity in ethnic terms really doesn't matter. It's more the social identity that matters than the ethnic identity. Now, concerning the soldier's tomb, that's my question. We've seen the stele individually, but we know that they're coming from the same tomb. So do we include the tomb? So we have people that are ambassadors, we have people that are Galatians, we have people that are ordinary Alexandrians of the first generation. What is the connection? What is the reason for these people to be in the same structure? It's not just a gallery, but it's a systematic space. So, and the question is, to whom these identities do they refer? And do we have the media, do we have the means today to understand what they say? Plus, just a last parameter, many times we read in literature, especially for Greco-Roman, Alexandrian, Egypt, that style does not correspond to identities. Do you think that might the style correspond exactly to identities, but we don't have the means yet to see these messages that are sent? Thank you.
Yeah, well, what I was arguing today was that, yes, style does correspond to identity, and no, we might still be able to decipher it if we try harder. And what you said is exactly what I believe, that the identities are constructed before and after death. About the Ibrahimia cluster, I wish they were excavated by somebody like your team, and I wish they were still in somewhere in this city, so that we knew. I know. I said I wish they had been excavated properly and not taken away, because, as you said, in the Metropolitan, they are a gallery now. They are like a gallery. So I wish I really knew the structure of this tomb. But I also believe that these identities are constructed socially and ideologically on the point of death, and before and after death, and through burial, and through the creation of those galleries of deceased people. And Actually, I think that we are able, we could be able to understand them if we go back to the texts and if we read our anthropology, but not trying to make sense of them the way we understand ourselves today. But it's true, it's obvious that ethnic identities did not matter to these people the way they matter to us now. These people were not simply bilingual, they were really, truly, deeply bicultural. And this, I suppose, is the beginning of understanding this game of identities, identity construction.
We have one last question here, please.
Yes, good evening, Professor Demetriou. Thank you very much for your amazing presentation. I liked very much the comparison you made between identifying ourselves in modern times and the funerary stele as a sort of ID card in antiquity. I have only one question. Who took the decision of depicting the deceased in a particular scene? Were only the artisans, according to their artistic schools? In other words, did the relatives of the deceased share the decision of portraying the deceased in a certain or a particular way? In that case, I think the funerary stele was rather a reflection of the deceased, how they saw or how they regarded the deceased during his or her life. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I don't think, I think it was never the artist. The artists, the people who painted the stelae, did what they thought they should. And one good question is whether these stelae were ready-made, so that you can go and choose from the shop, and then ask for an inscription to be carved on it or whatever. Some of them may have been made on order, but it's always the deceased family who make this choice, unless the deceased themselves made some provisions while they were still alive. We know that, for example, with the Macedonian tombs, some of them at least must have been designed and actually built while the occupant, the future occupant, was still alive. So obviously he designed it. But with the stelae, it's not always easy to tell if the person would go and choose their own stele. And as Kyriakos says, we always need to take account of the wider structure in these multi-chambered tombs we have in Alexandria. Even though they come to us as artistic events, as aesthetically complete creations, they come from a milieu, they come from a way of understanding art as a representation of life and society, or of life within society. And it was always a choice of the deceased and more his or her family.
Related to children burials, we have a tomb stele, Alexandrian one, in the museum of the university, with a mother and her children, and it seems their names are written, and it seems that they are all buried together in one tomb. This stele and another one are published by Anne-Marie Guimet-Sorbet in a conference that was held in Marseille. And this was a series of some kind of round tables organized by our French colleagues, and they published more than one volume entitled L'Enfant et la Mort. You may have seen it. So I think you can find books in the Centre d'études Alexandrine, and they are very informative about what happened for dead children. Yes. Thank you.
Well, we have 1 minute. Dr. Fathiya, تفضلي.
Thank you all. Thank you for your great presentation. I have only one comment about the scene which is depicted on the tomb stele, which is some of them are reflecting the real life of the deceased. So there are some deceased depicted with their doing some of their profession. There are some stele which are reflecting what they wished to see on the stele. Because, for example, we have a stele of a scene for a woman, but only with a facial feature of a child. And the written inscription is expressing that she died while she was 3 months, and their family wished to see her like a full woman on her clean or something like that. We have also another example of a deceased child. He is 7 months, I think. He is depicted like a cavalryman on his horse with his khalamis or something like this, which means that sometimes they are depicted the real or reflecting the real life of the deceased, and some others reflecting what they are need to see. Also about the generalization of ethnic. I understand that you say that Gallic or from Gaul, they are ethnic with some privilege and characterizations in the society. But I think we shouldn't make it a common or general idea about ethnics in Alexandria. Because, for example, we have many stele and locally slabs with inscriptions from other ethnics, from Cyrenaica, from... If we make it general that they are not from Cyrenaica, for example, like the Gaulish army, they are from not go. It's something not, I think, not to be common for all tomb stele in Alexandria, or for the ethnics which appeared on the tomb stele of ancient Alexandria. I think something to be to be حذرين about this.
Be cautious.
Yes, about this. Thank you.
Yes, about the people from Gaul, or the Galatians. We don't really know if they were from Gaul. They were called Galatians. So it seems that there was a part in the Ptolemaic army, and that they had a typical particular type of shield, a typical type of dress, and that this included privileges. So it's not an ethnic, in the end, it's not ethnic anymore.
Well, thank you everyone. It was lovely, and this is a great beginning for an event which would last for a few days. Before we leave, Mark has some housekeeping comments, so just to know what's going to happen tomorrow, inshallah.
So concerning our program for tomorrow, it's going to start a morning field visit. At 9:30, we'll be waiting outside in the library. In this picture, I mean the place exactly here. We'll be waiting. And the buses will move exactly at 10 o'clock a.m. sharp to the Shadbi and Mustafa Kamel tombs. And then we are coming back. We'll finish at around 2 p.m. and then we'll be back at the library at 4 p.m. Until 7, there will be 2 lectures, Professor Mona Hagag and Dr. Kyriakos Afopoulos. Yeah.
If I may say, only for tomorrow visit in Shadbi Cemetery, if possible, not to take any photos with mobile. We, our team, will produce as much photos as you like from the event and from all of you. But please, no mobile to be raised in the Shadbi because the project is in progress and we'd like to present first what's complete. Thank you. I'm sorry for that.
And concerning the people that we inform them that there's no transportation for them because they already registered very late. But thanks God we handle it, that all people here attending, they will have a transportation, all the sites covered by the Bibliotheca Alexandrina. Okay? The entrance of the archaeological site, it will be in your own expenses, okay? Because we cannot cover this. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks a lot.